Chapter 12. Again, Stanley was the last one to finish digging. It was late afternoon when he dragged himself back to the compound. This time, he would have accepted a ride in the truck if it were offered. When he got to the tent, he found Mr. Pendanski and the other boys sitting in the circle. "Welcome, Stanley," said Mr. Pendanski. "Hey, caveman, get your hole dug?" asked Magnet. He nodded. He managed to nod. "You spit in it?" asked Squid. He nodded again. "You're right," he said to X-Ray. "The second hole's the hardest." X-Ray shook his head. "The third hole's the hardest," he said. Come join our circle," said Mr. Pendanski. Stanley plopped down between Squid and Magnet. He needed to rest up before taking a shower. "We've been discussing what we want to do with our lives," said Mr. Pendanski. "We're not going to be at Camp Green Lake forever. We need to prepare ourselves for the day we join the rest of society." "Hey, that's great, Mom," said Magnet. "They're going to finally let you out of here?" The other boys laughed. "Okay, Jose," said Mr. Pendanski. "What do you want to do with your life?" "I don't know," said Magnet. "You need to think about that," said Mr. Pendanski. "It's important to have goals. Otherwise, when you're going to end up right back in jail." "What do you like to do?" "I don't know," said Magnet. "You must like something," said Mr. Pendanski. "I like animals," said Magnet. "Good," said Mr. Pendanski. "Does anyone else know any jobs that involve animals?" "Veterinarian," said Armpit. "That's right, Mr. Pendanski." "You could work in a zoo," said Zigzag. "He belongs in a zoo," said Squid. Then he and X-Ray laughed. "How about you, Stanley? You have any ideas for Jose?" Stanley sighed. An animal trainer," he said. "Like for the circus or movies or something like that." Any of those jobs sound good to you, Jose?" asked Mr. Pendanski. "Yeah, I like what Caveman said about training animals for movies. I think they would be fun to train monkeys." X-Ray laughed. "Don't laugh, Rex," said Mr. Pendanski. "We don't laugh at people's dreams. Someone is going to have to train monkeys for the movies." "Who are you kidding, Mom?" asked X-Ray. "Magnet's never going to be a monkey trainer." "You don't know that," said Mr. Pendanski. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Nothing in life is easy, but there's no reason to give up. You'll be surprised what you can accomplish if you set your mind to it. After all, you only have one life, and you should try and make the most of it." Stanley tried to figure out what he'd say if Mr. Pendanski asked him what he wanted to do with his life. He used to want to work for the FBI, but that didn't seem appropriate place to mention that. "So far, you've all done a pretty good job of messing up your lives," said Mr. Pendanski. "I know you think you're cool." He looked at Stanley. "So you're caveman now, huh? You like digging holes, caveman?" Stanley didn't know what to say. "Well, let me tell you something, caveman. You're here on the count of one person, and that if it wasn't for that person, you wouldn't be digging holes in the hot sun. You know who that person is? My no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather." The other boys howled with laughter. Even Zero smiled. It was the first time Stanley had ever seen Zero smile. He usually had such an easy, angry expression on his face. Now he had such a huge smile, and it almost seemed too big for his face, like the smile on the jack-o'-lantern. "No," said Mr. Pendanski. "That person is you, Stanley. You're the reason why you're here. The reason for yourself. You're responsible for yourself. You messed up your life, and it's going to, and it's up to you to fix it. No one else is going to do it for you. For any of you." Mr. Pendanski looked from one boy to another. "You're all special in your own way," he said. "You've got something to offer, and you have to think about what you want to do. Then do it. Even you, Zero, you're not completely worthless." The smile was now gone from Zero's face. "What do you want to do with your life, Mr. Pendanski asked. Zero's mouth was shut tight as he glared at Mr. Pendanski. His dark eyes seemed to explain. How about it, Zero? Asked Mr. Pendanski. What do you like to do? I like to dig holes. All too soon, Stanley was back out on the lake, sticking his shovel into the dirt. X-Ray was right. The third hole was the hardest. So was the fourth hole, and then the fifth hole, and the sixth, he dug his shovel into the dirt. After a while, he lost track of the day of the week and how many of those holes he had dug. It all seemed to be one big hole, and he would take a year and a half to dig it. He guessed he'd lost at least 5 pounds. He figured that in a year, he'd be either in great physical condition or else dead. He dug his shovel into the dirt. It couldn't always be this hot, he thought. Surely it got cooler in December. Maybe then they'll froze. He dug his shovel into the dirt. His skin had gotten tougher. It didn't hurt so much to hold the shovel. As he drank from his canteen, he looked up at the sky. The cloud had appeared earlier in the day. This first cloud he could remember seeing since coming to Camp Green Lake. He and the other boys had been watching it all day, hoping it would move in front of the sun. Occasionally it got close, but it was just teasing them. His hole was waist deep. He dug his shovel into the dirt. As he dumped it out, he found something glistening as it fell onto the dirt pile. Whatever it was quickly buried. Stanley stared at the pile a moment, unsure if he'd even seen it. Even if it was something, what good was it to him? He promised he'd give anything he found to X-Ray. It didn't seem worth the effort to climb out of his hole to check it out. He glanced up to the cloud, which was close enough to the sun, and he had to squint at it. He dug his shovel back into the earth, scooped up some driftwood, scooped up some dirt, and lifted it over his dirt pile. But instead of dumping it there, he tossed it off to the side. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. He climbed out of his hole and sifted his finger through the pile. He held something in his hands, hard and metallic. He felt something hard and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a gold tube about as long as and wide as a second finger on his right hand. The tube was open at the end and closed on the other. He used a few drops of precious water to clean it. There seemed to be some kind of design on the flat closed end. He poured a few more drops of water on it and then rubbed it on the inside of his pant pocket. He looked again and at the design engraved on the flat bottom of the tube. He could see an outline of a heart and letters KB etched inside. He tried to figure out some way that he wouldn't have to give it to X-Ray. He could just keep it, and that wouldn't do him any good. He wanted a day off. He looked at the large piles of dirt near X-Ray where X-Ray was digging. X-Ray was probably almost finished for the day. Getting the rest of the day off would hardly do him any good. X-Ray would first have to show the tube to Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski, who would have to show it to the warden. By then, X-Ray would be done. Anyway, Stanley wondered about trying to secretly take the tube to the warden. He could explain the situation to the warden. The warden might make an excuse for giving the day off so X-Ray wouldn't suspect. He looked across the lake toward the cabin under the two oak trees. The place scared him. He had been at Camp Green Lake almost 2 weeks, and he still hadn't seen the warden. That was just as well. If he could get his entire year and a half without seeing the warden, that would be fine with him. Besides, he didn't know if the warden would find the tube interesting. He looked at it again. It looked familiar. He thought he'd seen something like it somewhere before, but he couldn't quite place it. "What you got there, caveman?" asked Zigzag. Stanley's large hand closed around the tube. "Nothing. Just, it was useless. I think I might have found something. Another fossil? No, I'm not sure what it is." "Let me see it," said Zigzag. Instead of showing it to Zigzag, Stanley brought it to X-Ray. Zigzag followed. X-Ray looked at the tube, then rubbed his dirty glasses on his dirty shirt and looked at the tube again. One by one, the other boys dropped their shovels and came to look. "It looks like an old shotgun shell," said Squid. "Yeah, it's probably what it is," said Stanley. He decided not to mention the engraved design. Maybe nobody would notice. He doubted X-Ray could see it. "No, it's too long and thin to be a shotgun shell," said Magnet. "It's probably just a piece of junk," said Stanley. "Well, I'll show it to Mom," said X-Ray. "See what he thinks. Who knows? Maybe I'll get the day off." "Your hole's almost finished," said Stanley. "Yeah, so?" Stanley raised and lowered his shoulder. So why don't you wait until tomorrow to show it to Mom?" he suggested. "You can pretend you found it first thing in the morning. That way you get the whole day off instead of just an hour or so this afternoon." X-Ray smiled. "Good thinking, caveman." He dropped the tube into his large pocket on the right leg of his dirty orange pants. Stanley returned to his hole. When the water truck came, Stanley started to take his place at the end of the line, but X-Ray told him to get behind Magnet in front of Zero. Stanley moved up one place in line.